The baby did not cry. In the abandoned mine shaft, with the blizzard screaming outside like a wounded animal, Elias Calhoun held the infant in his trembling hands and watched her tiny lips turn blue. The firelight flickered against the stone walls, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Clara lay on the makeshift bed of blankets, her face white as the snow outside, her voice breaking as she reached toward him. "My baby, why is she not crying? Elias, why is she not crying?" The words barely registered. Elias stared at the small form in his hands, at the perfect fingers curled into fists, at the closed eyes that should have been opening, at the chest that should have been rising and falling, but was still, so terribly still. All those years of solitude collapsed into this single moment. He saw another baby, another cold morning, another silence that had broken him in ways he never recovered from. His son, Thomas, born without breath, buried without a name, mourned by a wife who died 3 days later believing her husband hated her. "No," Elias whispered, his voice cracking like ice on a frozen river. "Not this time. Not again." He turned the baby face down, supporting her tiny chest with one calloused hand. His palm covered nearly her entire torso. She was so small, so fragile, so silent. He struck her back. Once, firmly but not too hard. Nothing. Clara was sobbing now, trying to sit up, reaching for the child she had carried through miles of wilderness, through betrayal and heartbreak, and a love that had cost her everything. "Please, please, my daughter, please." Elias struck again, harder this time. His hand connected with the soft flesh between shoulder blades, no bigger than his thumb. Still nothing. The baby remained limp, remained blue, remained a weight in his hands that felt heavier than any burden he had ever carried. "Breathe," he commanded. "Damn you, breathe." A third strike, his arm shaking now, his vision blurring with tears he had not shed since Margaret's death. Behind him, Sergeant Marcus Webb pressed his hand against his wounded shoulder and watched with the expression of a man who had seen too much death to expect miracles, but still prayed for them anyway. The fourth strike was desperate. It was rage and grief and over a decade of guilt channeled into a single blow. It was everything Elias had left to give. And then, a cough, small and wet and beautiful beyond description. A sputter, air forced from tiny lungs that were finally working. And then the cry, weak at first, barely audible above the wind outside, but growing stronger with each passing second. The most beautiful sound Elias Calhoun had ever heard in his 52 years of living. "She is breathing," he said, and his voice broke completely. "Clara, your daughter is breathing. You have a daughter." He wrapped the infant in the cleanest cloth they had, swaddling her with hands that had delivered death more often than life during the war, and placed her on Clara's chest. Mother and child, both crying now, both alive, both miracles in this cave of stone and shadow. Elias sat back against the cold rock wall and let the tears fall. After all those barren years, the flood finally came. But even as he wept, even as he watched Clara press her lips to her daughter's forehead and whisper words of love, a part of his mind remained alert. Because this moment of grace had not come easily, and the men who wanted Clara dead were still out there in the storm, waiting. 3 weeks earlier, none of this had existed. 3 weeks earlier, Elias Calhoun had been a man alone on a mountain, hiding from a past he could not escape. And then a woman had appeared on his doorstep with a rifle pointed at his chest and secrets that would change everything. This is how it began. November 1882, the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana Territory. The snow came early that year, heavy and relentless, as if nature itself had decided to seal away the world from human interference. Elias Calhoun rounded the final bend in the trail, his boots crunching through 6 inches of fresh powder, and stopped cold. Smoke rose from his cabin's chimney. His cabin, the only structure for 8 miles in any direction, the place he had chosen precisely because no one would ever find it unless they were looking. Someone had found it. Elias dropped into a crouch behind a fallen pine, his hand moving automatically to the hunting rifle slung across his back. More than 15 years of solitude had not dulled his instincts. If anything, Isolation had sharpened them. He had learned to trust the prickle at the back of his neck, the tightening in his gut that warned of danger. He studied the cabin. Fresh tracks in the snow led to the door. Small feet, light step, not a man's gait. The woodpile had been disturbed, several logs missing. Whoever was inside had been there long enough to build a fire. His fire, in his home, using his wood. The old anger rose in his chest, hot and familiar. He had come to this mountain to be alone, had buried himself in wilderness specifically to avoid exactly this kind of intrusion. And now some stranger had violated his sanctuary. But anger warred with caution. The tracks were too small for a man, and there was something desperate about them. The stride too long for the footprint size, as if whoever made them had been pushing themselves to the point of collapse. Elias circled around, approaching the cabin from the rear, where a small window offered a view of the interior. He pressed his face to the cold glass and looked inside. A woman stood at his stove. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, with dark hair pulled back in a braid that had come half undone. She wore a wool coat that had seen better days, good quality but faded and travel-worn. Her back was to him as she stirred something in a pot. But even from this angle, even through the distorted glass, Elias could see the unmistakable swell of her belly. Pregnant, heavily pregnant, 8 months along at least. What in God's name was a pregnant woman doing alone in the Bitterroot Mountains in November? He considered his options. He could wait for her to leave, but she clearly had nowhere to go. He could confront her directly, but surprising a desperate woman in a strange place rarely ended well. Or he could simply walk up to his own front door like a civilized person and see what happened. Elias chose the third option, but he kept his rifle handy just in case. He rounded the cabin, making enough noise that she would hear him coming, and climbed the 3 wooden steps to his porch. The boards creaked under his weight. Inside, the sounds of cooking stopped abruptly. He reached for the door handle. The door flew open before he could touch it. She stood in the doorway holding his Winchester rifle. His Winchester. The one he kept loaded by the door for emergencies. The barrel pointed square at his chest, steady as a rock despite the cold that turned her breath to white clouds. That is far enough. Her voice was clear and commanding, not the trembling tone of a frightened woman, but the measured cadence of someone who had been in dangerous situations before and survived them. Her finger rested on the trigger, not tense but ready. She knew how to hold a weapon. Elias raised his gloved hands slowly. He had survived the Civil War. He had survived 18 years of frontier medicine. He had no intention of dying on his own porch at the hands of a pregnant stranger. "This is my cabin," he said carefully, measuring each word. "Has been for many years now." Her eyes narrowed, pale as winter sky, sharp as the wind cutting through the pines behind him. They studied him with an intensity that suggested she was calculating odds, measuring threats, deciding whether he was telling the truth or simply trying to reclaim stolen property. "You do not look like you have been here recently." She gestured with the rifle barrel toward the interior. No smoke from the chimney when I arrived. Snow piled against the door. Food stores untouched. I thought this place was abandoned. "I have been hunting," Elias replied. 3 days up in the high country. Elk do not come down this far until December." He took a slow step forward. "Now put down my rifle before someone gets hurt. Stay where you are." The command came sharp and immediate. She shifted her stance, bracing the weapon more firmly against her shoulder. "I have been here 2 days. No tracks, no signs of life. I had every reason to believe this place was empty. Well, it is not. Another careful step, and you are trespassing. I am surviving." Her voice cracked slightly on the word, the first sign of weakness she had shown. Elias heard it, recognized it for what it was. The sound of someone who had pushed beyond exhaustion into the territory where the body simply refused to stop because stopping meant dying. He looked at her more carefully now. The coat was good quality, or had been once. City clothes, not mountain gear. Her face was pale, shadows dark beneath her eyes, and her hands, despite their steadiness on the rifle, trembled slightly at the edges of his vision. "How long have you been walking?" he asked. She blinked, surprised by the question. "What? How long have you been walking to get here? In your condition?" He nodded toward her belly. Could not have been easy. For a long moment she said nothing. The wind picked up, howling through the pines, and snow began to fall again in thick, heavy flakes. She swayed slightly, and Elias saw the exhaustion written in every line of her body. 2 days, she said finally, from Willow Creek. The last coach to Helena left without me. I had nowhere else to go. Willow Creek was 8 miles away. 8 miles through snow and cold, heavily pregnant, alone. Elias felt something shift in his chest, some long dormant instinct that remembered what it meant to care about another person's survival. Lower the rifle, he said, his voice gentler now. I am not going to hurt you, but you need to get inside before you freeze to death on my porch. How do I know I can trust you? But even as she asked, the rifle barrel dipped slightly, her arms weakening. You do not, Elias admitted, but I am your best option right now. And that baby you are carrying does not care about trust. It just needs warmth. She looked down at her belly, one hand moving instinctively to rest there, protective and tender. When she looked back up, something in her face had changed. Not softened exactly, but shifted from defiance to a kind of resigned acceptance. All right. She lowered the Winchester slowly, carefully, as if even that small surrender cost her something. But I sleep with this beside me, and if you try anything, anything at all, I will shoot you. Fair enough, Elias said. He approached the porch, watching her the way he might watch a wounded animal, cautious and respectful of her capacity for violence. Up close, he could see she was even younger than he had first thought, mid-20s at most, with dark hair that framed a face too thin for her condition and eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. Name is Elias Calhoun, he said, stopping at the bottom step. And you are. She hesitated. In that hesitation, Elias saw a whole story. Secrets carefully guarded, decisions about what to reveal and what to keep hidden. Clara, she said finally. Clara Whitmore, I am a widow. He nodded, not asking the obvious question about the lack of a wedding ring or mourning clothes. People in the mountains understood that sometimes silence was a kindness. Well, Mrs. Whitmore, welcome to my home, such as it is. He climbed the steps and she moved aside to let him pass. The interior of the cabin struck him immediately. She had not just stayed here, she had organized it. The floors had been swept, his scattered belongings arranged in neat piles, the fireplace cleaned of old ash. On the rough-hewn table sat a small stack of coins, maybe $3. You said you ate my food stores, Elias said. Color rose in her pale cheeks. I am sorry. I thought no one was coming back. I left money on the table. What I could afford. Elias scooped up the coins and pressed them back into her hand. Keep your money. You will need it more than I will. I do not take charity, Mr. Calhoun. It is not charity. He moved past her to stoke the fire, adding logs until flames began to lick at the wood. It is economics. You can stay until the baby comes. You cook, clean, keep house. I provide shelter and food. No money involved. Just work for room and board. She stared at him, and he could see her mind working through the offer, looking for the trap, the hidden cost, the inevitable betrayal. He recognized that wariness. He had worn it himself since Marguerite's death. Until the baby comes, she repeated slowly. And then what? Then we revisit the arrangement. He hung his coat on the peg by the door, set his hunting pack down, and turned to face her. I am not a saint, Mrs. Whitmore. I do not do this out of goodness. I do it because I am tired of cooking my own meals and living in chaos. If you can earn your keep, you can stay. Fair, she agreed, though her hand still clutched the rifle. But I have one condition. What is that? No questions about my past. Her steady gaze met his, unflinching. You do not ask where I came from or why I am here. And I do not ask why a man lives alone in the middle of nowhere for so many years. We keep our histories to ourselves. Elias felt the corners of his mouth twitch in what might have been a smile if he still remembered how to make one. No questions about the past. I can live with that. Then we have an arrangement. She extended her free hand and he shook it. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused. Not the hand of a lady, but of someone who had worked hard in her life. I will take the main room, Elias said, releasing her hand. You can have the lean-to off the back. It is small, but there is a cot and a stove. Should be warm enough. Thank you. For the first time, something like relief flickered across her face. And Mr. Calhoun, I really am sorry about the food. Forget it. He moved to check the supplies she had used, mentally cataloging what needed to be replaced. You did what you had to do to survive. No shame in that. That night, after Clara had retired to the small lean-to room, Elias sat by the fire in his chair and listened to the sounds of another person breathing in his home. It had been so long, so desperately, achingly long, since he had shared space with anyone. The loneliness had become so much a part of him that he had forgotten it was loneliness at all, had mistaken it for peace. But now, with Clara Whitmore sleeping 20 feet away, her presence filling the cabin with the weight of unspoken stories and carefully guarded secrets, he remembered. Remembered what it felt like to be responsible for someone else's warmth, someone else's safety, someone else's life. The memory terrified him. He closed his eyes and saw, as he always did in the moments before sleep, Marguerite's face. Beautiful Marguerite, his wife, the woman he had loved and destroyed in equal measure. She had died so many years ago, believing he despised her, believing the child she had carried was not his, believing the rumors spread by a jealous man who had wanted her for himself. And Elias had let her believe it, had stood silent and cold while she begged for his trust, had refused to go to her when she called his name from her deathbed, had buried her and their son without shedding a single tear because he thought his grief would be hypocrisy. 10 years later, he had found her diary, hidden in a trunk he had never opened. She had written everything, the truth about the rumors, about who had started them, about the baby being his, always his, only his, about loving him even as he broke her heart. The guilt that had crushed him then had never lifted. He had come to this mountain to escape it, but you cannot outrun what lives inside you. Every night for years he had closed his eyes and seen her face and heard her voice calling his name from the room where she lay dying. And every night he had not answered. In the lean-to room, Clara Whitmore cried softly into her pillow. The sound carried through the thin walls like an accusation, or perhaps like an echo. Two people, both running from past they could not escape, both carrying guilt they could not shed, both finding themselves in the same cabin at the end of the world, bound together by necessity and secrets. But outside, in the darkness beyond the firelight, fresh tracks circled the cabin, horse prints barely visible in the falling snow. Someone had been there, watching, waiting. Elias, lost in his thoughts and memories, did not see them. Not yet, not until morning, when it would already be too late to know how long they had been observed, or by whom, or what that silent watcher's intentions might be. Somewhere else, many miles away, in a shabby hotel room in Helena, a man named Victor Stanhope read a telegram by candlelight. Target has moved toward Bitterroot. Man protecting her. Stanhope was 48 years old, former captain in the United States Army. Recently resigned under circumstances he preferred not to discuss. He had the bearing of a military officer in the eyes of a predator, cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. He burned the telegram and watched the ashes curl into nothing. No witnesses, he said to the two men standing in the shadows behind him. She has evidence that will destroy me. Find her. Silence her. Make it look like the winter took her. What about the man? Him too. Stanhope turned from the window. Anyone who gets in the way dies. Is that understood? The two men nodded. One was a brute named Harlan, with hands like sledgehammers and a face scarred by years of violent work. The other was younger, barely 25, with nervous eyes that suggested he had not yet grown comfortable with the work they did. And find out who he is. I want to know what we are dealing with before we move. The candle guttered and died, plunging the room into darkness. But even in the black, Stanhope's eyes seemed to gleam with a light of their own. The light of a man who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. The hunt had begun. Morning came gray and cold, the sun hidden behind thick clouds that promised more snow. Elias woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and for one disorienting moment, he thought he was 20 years younger. Married, happy. Then reality reasserted itself. He sat up to find Clara at his stove, cooking breakfast with the efficiency of someone who had done this task 1,000 times before. "Morning," she said without turning around. "Coffee is ready. Eggs will be done in a minute." He poured himself a cup from the battered tin pot and took a sip. It was strong and bitter and perfect. Army coffee, the kind soldiers made in the field when staying awake, mattered more than taste. "You make coffee like a soldier," he observed. Her hand paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing to turn the eggs. "My father was in the cavalry, taught me young. He died 10 years ago." She slid eggs onto 2 plates, added bacon, and brought them to the table. "Cholera outbreak at Fort Laramie. Took half the garrison." They ate in silence, the kind of companionable quiet that came from 2 people who understood the value of not filling every moment with meaningless words. Elias watched her covertly as she ate, noting the way she held her fork, the careful, measured bites that spoke of training in etiquette and manners. City-bred, officer's daughter, which made her presence here, alone and pregnant and running from something, even more of a mystery. After breakfast, she insisted on washing the dishes while he prepared for the day's work. He noticed she organized his shelves as she worked, putting canned goods in neat rows, grouping like items together, creating order from the chaos he had lived in for years. He needed to check his trap lines, needed to bring in more firewood before the next storm, needed to do the 100 small tasks that kept a man alive through a Montana winter. But first, he needed to check on something else. "I am going to walk the perimeter," he told Clara. "Make sure no animals have been getting too close to the cabin." It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. "Be careful," Clara said from the sink. "The temperature is dropping." Outside, Elias moved quickly through the fresh snow, his eyes scanning the ground. It did not take long to find what he was looking for. Tracks, horse tracks, circling the cabin at a distance of about 50 yards. The prints were clear despite the overnight snowfall, which meant whoever made them had been here recently, within the last few hours before dawn. Elias knelt and examined the prints more closely. His gut tightened. The horseshoes had a distinctive pattern, special nails placed at specific intervals. He had seen that pattern before, years ago on cavalry horses. These were not the shoes of a civilian mount or a ranch horse. These were military issue. Someone from the army was watching his cabin. He stood slowly, his eyes moving to the ridge above the tree line. Nothing visible, but that did not mean nothing was there. Back inside, he found Clara exactly where he had left her, finishing the dishes. She turned when he entered, and something in her face shifted when she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" Elias considered lying, considered keeping this information to himself until he knew more. But something about the way she asked, the way her hand moved unconsciously to her belly, told him she already suspected something was wrong. "Someone was here last night," he said quietly, "on horseback, circling the cabin." The color drained from her face. "Who?" "I do not know." But the horseshoes were cavalry issue. Clara swayed slightly. Her hand gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. "They found me," she whispered. "Oh God, they found me." "Who found you?" "Clara. Who is looking for you?" But she did not answer. Instead, she moved quickly to the window, peering out at the snow-covered landscape with the intensity of a hunted animal. "How far is the nearest town from here?" "Willow Creek, 8 miles east, and Helena, 40 miles north. But the passes will be blocked by now. No way in or out until spring, unless you want to risk your life." Clara turned from the window. Her winter sky eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I should have told you from the beginning. The arrangement was no questions about the past. The arrangement was made before someone followed me to your door." She moved to the small table and sat heavily, one hand pressed to her lower back. The pregnancy was clearly taking its toll. "I am not who I said I was. Not entirely." Elias remained standing. "Go on. My name is Clara Whitmore." "That part was true, but I am not a widow." She looked up at him, and he saw shame and fear and desperate hope warring in her expression. "My husband is alive, in prison." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Prison," Elias repeated. "Deer Lodge, Montana Territorial Penitentiary." Clara's voice steadied as she spoke, as if confessing finally had given her strength. He was convicted 6 months ago. Embezzlement of Army payroll. 15 years hard labor. Elias said nothing. He waited. His name is Daniel Whitmore, Lieutenant, 3rd Cavalry. He was my father's adjutant before my father died. We married 3 years ago. And you are running because your husband is a thief. No. Clara's hands clenched into fists on the table. I am running because my husband is innocent. And the man who actually stole that money is trying to kill me because I can prove it. Elias pulled out the chair across from her and sat. Tell me everything. She told him. She told him about Captain Victor Stanhope, her husband's commanding officer, about the gambling debts he had accumulated over years of poor decisions, about the missing payroll, $5,000 that had vanished into thin air. She told him about the investigation that had pointed every finger at Daniel, about the money found hidden in their quarters, the forged receipts bearing signatures that looked like her husband's hand, the swift court-martial and the swifter conviction. Daniel told me he was innocent, Clara said, her voice breaking. He looked me in the eyes and told me. But the evidence was overwhelming. The money was in our home, Elias, in a trunk we both used, and the receipts had his signature. How could I believe him over what I saw with my own eyes? Did you ask him to explain? Clara nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. He said he was framed, said Stanhope had set him up, but he had no proof. And Stanhope was a captain, a decorated officer with 20 years of service. Who would believe a lieutenant over him? So you believed the evidence? I did not know what to believe. Clara wiped her eyes roughly with the back of her hand. I was scared, pregnant. The Army evicted me from officers' quarters the day after the sentencing. Daniel's family wanted nothing to do with me. I had no money, no friends, nowhere to go. But you ran. Yes. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. I ran. I took what little money I had saved, and I ran. And I left Daniel to rot in that prison, thinking I believed he was guilty, thinking I had abandoned him. And now someone is trying to find you. Not just find me, kill me. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and creased as if it had been read many times. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from a guard at Deer Lodge, a man named Marcus Webb. He said Daniel was dying, consumption, maybe 2 months left. But more than that, he said Daniel had told him something that changed everything. Elias took the letter she offered. He read it slowly, his eyes moving over the careful handwriting. The words struck him like blows. Daniel Whitmore had not stolen the payroll. He had taken the blame to protect his wife, because Stanhope had threatened to implicate Clara as an accomplice. She had signed requisition forms at his request, forms that turned out to be fraudulent receipts for the stolen money. If Daniel fought the charges, Stanhope would bring Clara down with him. So Daniel had confessed, had gone to prison, had let himself be destroyed to keep his wife safe. My God, Elias breathed. He sacrificed himself for me, Clara said, her voice hollow. He loved me so much that he chose 15 years in hell rather than watch me stand trial. And I repaid that love by doubting him, by running away, by leaving him to die alone. He is still alive. Barely. Clara took the letter back, folding it carefully. And Stanhope knows I have evidence now. Daniel managed to smuggle documents out of the fort before his arrest, accounting records that prove Stanhope was embezzling for years. He sent them to me the day before he was convicted. I did not understand what they were until Webb's letter explained everything. And Stanhope is trying to silence you before you can use them? He will never stop hunting me, Clara said. Not until I am dead, or he is. Those documents will destroy him. Prison, disgrace, possibly execution. He will do anything to make sure they never see the light of day. Elias sat back in his chair. His mind was racing, processing this new information, seeing the shape of the danger that had followed Clara to his door. There is something else, Clara said quietly. Something I should have told you when I first arrived. She stood and moved to the corner of the cabin where his personal belongings had been stored. She knelt with difficulty, her belly making the movement awkward, and pulled out a wooden box that had been hidden beneath the floorboards. I searched your cabin while you were away, she admitted, looking for weapons, supplies, anything that might help me survive. Elias felt a flash of anger, quickly suppressed. "And what did you find?" Clara opened the box. Inside were letters, photographs, a faded military portrait. She pulled out one photograph and held it up. Elias's breath caught in his throat. The photograph showed him as he had been 20 years ago. Younger, stronger, still wearing the uniform of a Union Army medic. And standing beside him, arm in a sling but grinning at the camera, was Captain Robert Holbrook, 3rd Cavalry, Medical Corps, Clara's father. "I knew who you were before I ever reached this cabin," Clara said. "My father wrote about you in every letter he sent home. Said you were the best field surgeon he had ever worked with. Said you saved his life twice during the war. Said if I ever needed help and had nowhere else to turn, I should find Elias Calhoun in the Bitterroot Mountains." Elias stared at the photograph, at the face of a man he had not thought about in years. A man who had been his friend, his mentor, his salvation during the darkest days of the war. "Robert Holbrook died 12 years ago," he said slowly. "Of cholera?" "Yes." "No." Elias looked up, meeting Clara's pale, steady gaze. Eyes that were so like her father's. Something about the way her expression shifted told him she already suspected what he was about to say. "Your father did not die of cholera." "Did he?" Clara's face crumpled. "I do not know. I never knew for certain, but I always wondered. He was strong, healthy, and then he just died, in less than a week. The doctors said it was cholera, but something always felt wrong. What happened in that week?" He was going to file a report. Clara's voice trembled. "About irregularities in the payroll records. He never told me the details, but I remember him being worried, agitated. He told my mother he was going to do something he should have done years ago. 3 days later, he was dead." The pieces fell into place in Elias's mind like a puzzle, finally completing itself. "Stanhope," he said. "Your father found out about Stanhope 12 years ago." "I think so." Clara sat down heavily, her hand pressed against her belly. "And I think Stanhope killed him for it, made it look like disease, then waited 12 years until Daniel stumbled onto the same evidence my father found. And now Stanhope is cleaning house, eliminating anyone who knows the truth." Clara nodded. "Webb's letter said Daniel confessed everything to the prison chaplain. About Stanhope, about why he took the blame. He said Daniel wanted me to take the documents to the U.S. Marshal in Helena, but I could not get there before Stanhope's men started following me. So I came here instead." "You came to me." "I came to the only person my father ever truly trusted." Elias stood abruptly, moving to the window. His heart was pounding in his chest, old memories crashing against new revelations. Robert Holbrook had been more than a friend. He had been the man who pulled Elias from the brink of suicide after the war, who gave him a reason to keep living when everything seemed hopeless, who introduced him to Marguerite. "Your father was a good man," Elias said without turning around. "One of the best I ever knew. He was not perfect. No one is." Clara's voice came small and fragile from behind him. "There is one more thing, Mr. Calhoun. One more secret my father kept." Elias turned. Clara's hands were shaking. "Webb told me something in his letter. Something Daniel discovered in the old records. My father was not just an innocent victim who stumbled onto Stanhope's crimes." "What do you mean?" Clara met his eyes. 15 years ago, before I was born, my father was having financial troubles. My mother was ill. The treatments were expensive. And Captain Stanhope offered him a way out. A cold feeling crept through Elias's chest. "What kind of way out?" "A bribe." Clara's voice broke. "A small percentage of a payroll embezzlement. Enough to save his precious wife." Elias said nothing. "When my father tried to turn Stanhope in, Stanhope reminded him of their history, told him they would both hang if the truth came out. But my father went ahead anyway, and Stanhope killed him for it." The silence stretched between them. Clara's tears fell freely now. "My father was not a hero, Mr. Calhoun. He was a man who made a terrible mistake. He compromised his honor to save my mother, but he spent the rest of his life trying to make it right. He died trying to do the right thing. Does that not count for something?" Elias thought of Marguerite, of his own sins, of the things he had done and failed to do and regretted every day since her death. "It counts for everything," he said finally. "Your father made a mistake. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do afterward, whether we run from our guilt or face it. Clara looked up at him with something like hope in her eyes. Is that why you are here? On this mountain? Are you running too? For a long moment, Elias did not answer. Then he moved back to his chair and sat down heavily. Her name was Marguerite, he began, and once he started, the words came like water through a broken dam. He told Clara everything, about his wife, about the pregnancy while he was at war, about the rumors spread by a jealous man named Samuel Vance, about how he had believed those rumors despite having no proof, about the day his son was born without breath, about the words he had spoken to Marguerite as she lay dying. Maybe God is judging us for your sins. He told her about refusing to go to Marguerite's deathbed, about burying her and their son without a single tear, about finding her diary 10 years later and learning the truth. She was innocent, Elias said, his voice raw. She had never been unfaithful. The baby was mine, and I let her die thinking I hated her. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. Her grip was warm despite the cold cabin. We are the same, she whispered. Both of us. We failed the people we loved. We let doubt and fear destroy what should have been unbreakable. Yes. Then maybe, Clara said slowly, maybe we can help each other. You can help me reach Daniel before he dies. And I can help you remember that redemption is still possible. Elias looked at this young woman, this daughter of his old friend, this mother carrying a child whose father was dying in prison for crimes he did not commit. He saw in her the same guilt he carried, the same desperate hope that it was not too late to make things right. Deer Lodge is 150 miles from here, he said, in the middle of winter, with men trying to kill you. I know. You are 8 months pregnant. I know. And you want to cross that distance to tell your husband you are sorry before he dies. Clara's jaw set with determination. I want to tell him I believe him. I want to tell him I love him. And I want to tell him he has a daughter who will grow up knowing her father was a hero. Elias looked toward the window, toward the mountains that had been his prison and his sanctuary for so many years. Then we had better start planning, he said, because those men out there are not going to make it easy. Outside, unseen by either of them, the watcher on the ridge raised his spyglass and studied the cabin below. He had seen enough. The woman was here. The evidence was with her. All that remained was to report back to Captain Stanhope and wait for orders. The hunt was far from over. It was only beginning. The next 3 days passed in a strange rhythm of preparation and waiting. Elias gathered supplies, preserved meat, dried goods, ammunition, medical supplies, everything they would need for a journey that should have been impossible. Clara, for her part, pushed herself to the limits of what her body would allow. She helped where she could, organizing and packing, planning and replanning the route they would take. But the pregnancy was taking its toll. Each day she moved a little slower, her face a little paler, her breathing a little more labored. On the third evening, as they sat by the fire reviewing their preparations, Clara asked him something unexpected. Do you still pray, Mr. Calhoun? Elias looked up from the map he had been studying. It had been years since anyone had asked him about faith. No, he said quietly. I stopped talking to God the day Marguerite died. Clara was silent for a moment. Then she said, I used to pray every night. My father taught me. He said God listened even when we felt too small to be heard. And do you still believe that? I do not know. Clara's hand rested on her belly, a habitual gesture. After everything that has happened, I'm not sure what I believe anymore. But sometimes when I cannot sleep, I find myself saying the words anyway, just in case someone is listening. Elias turned back to his map, but his mind was elsewhere. That night, after Clara had retired to her room, he found himself alone by the dying fire. The Bible she had placed on his shelf weeks ago caught his eye. It had been there since she arrived, a silent witness to his faithlessness. He picked it up. The leather was cracked with age, the pages yellowed. His own Bible. The one Marguerite had given him before the war. He had not opened it in over a decade. His fingers found a familiar passage almost by instinct. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He remembered Marguerite's voice reading these words to him on the night before he shipped out. Remembered her hands holding the same book. Remembered her faith, strong and simple, that had carried her through so much. He set the Bible down and turned away. Some doors once closed were too heavy to open again. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor. Elias heard the horse first, a single rider approaching through the snow. He grabbed his rifle and positioned himself at the window while Clara moved to the back room, out of sight. The rider emerged from the tree line, an older man, perhaps 55, with a weathered face and the bearing of someone who had spent his life in hard labor. He wore the dark uniform of a territorial prison guard beneath a snow-covered coat. "Hello, the cabin," the man called out, raising his hands to show they were empty. "My name is Marcus Webb. I am looking for Clara Whitmore." Clara's sharp intake of breath came from the back room. "That is him," she whispered, "the guard who wrote the letter." Elias did not lower his rifle. "How do we know you are who you say you are?" "Because the only person who would know about this cabin is Robert Holbrook, and Robert Holbrook is dead." Webb's voice was tired but steady. "Mrs. Whitmore's husband told me where to find her. Said her father used to talk about a man named Elias Calhoun who lived in the Bitterroots. Said if she ever needed help, she should come here." Slowly, Elias lowered the rifle. "Come inside, but make no sudden movements." Webb dismounted and approached the cabin. Up close, Elias could see the exhaustion in his face. The man had been riding hard for days. Inside, Clara emerged from the back room. Her face was a mixture of fear and hope as she recognized the guard who had sent her the letter that changed everything. "Mr. Webb, what are you doing here? Your letter said to go to the U.S. Marshal." "Plans have changed, Mrs. Whitmore." Webb removed his hat and held it in his hands. "Your husband is worse. The doctor gives him weeks, maybe days. He asked me to find you, to bring you to him before the end." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Days. The consumption is progressing faster than anyone expected." Webb's voice softened with something like compassion. "He knows you were coming. I told him about your journey, about seeking out Calhoun. It gave him hope, but he is afraid he will not last long enough to see you." Clara sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "Oh, God. Oh, Daniel. There is more." Webb turned to Elias. "Your cabin has been watched. Men from Helena, Stanhope's hired guns." "I know. I found their tracks 3 days ago." "Then you know time is running out. Stanhope knows where Mrs. Whitmore is. He is gathering men, waiting for the weather to clear before he moves. We have to get her out of here. To Deer Lodge. That is 150 miles in the dead of winter. There is another way." Webb pulled a folded map from inside his coat. "The old mining road through Copper Ridge. Abandoned for 20 years, but still passable in winter if you know what you're doing. It cuts 40 miles off the journey." Elias studied the map. He knew Copper Ridge, had avoided it for years because of the dangerous terrain. Steep grades, narrow passes. One wrong step and you go off the side of the mountain. True, but faster, and harder for Stanhope to follow. Clara stood, her jaw set with determination. "I do not care about the danger. Daniel is dying. I have to reach him." "Mrs. Whitmore," Webb hesitated. "There is one more thing you should know, something your husband wanted me to tell you in person." Clara waited. "He wanted you to know why he took the blame. The full truth." "I already know. He did it to protect me." "Yes, but do you know what he was protecting you from?" Clara's face went pale. "The receipts, the ones I signed for Stanhope." Webb nodded slowly. "Stanhope gave you those forms. Told you they were routine paperwork. Payroll authorizations, transfer requests. You signed them without reading them carefully because, why would you? He was your husband's commanding officer." "I remember." Clara's voice was barely audible. "He said his clerk was sick, said he needed help with administrative work." "Those forms were not administrative work. They were fraudulent receipts for the stolen money. Your signature on them made you an accomplice in the eyes of the law. But I did not know. The law does not always care about what we knew. If Daniel had fought the charges, if he had tried to expose Stanhope, the captain would have dragged you into it. Made it look like you were both involved. A husband and wife conspiracy. You would have gone to prison too." Clara's legs gave out. She collapsed back into the chair, her face white as bone. "Daniel knew," Webb continued gently. He knew the moment he saw those receipts in evidence that Stanhope had used you, had set up both of you. So he made a choice. He confessed. He confessed. Took full responsibility. Said he acted alone. Said you knew nothing about any of it. To save me. Clara's tears fell freely now. He destroyed himself to save me, and I repaid him by running away, by doubting him, by leaving him to die alone, thinking I believed he was guilty. No, ma'am. Webb's voice was firm. He does not think that. Not anymore. What do you mean? I told him you were coming, that you had figured out the truth, that you were risking everything to reach him. Webb paused. And I told him about the baby. Clara's head snapped up. What? He did not know. When you left, you did not know you were pregnant. But I told him he was going to be a father. What did he say? Webb's weathered face softened into something like a smile. He cried, Mrs. Whitmore. For the first time since I have known him, that man broke down and wept. And then he told me to find you, to bring you to him. Not because he needs to see you, though he does, but because he needs you to know he forgives you, has always forgiven you, will love you until his last breath and beyond. The cabin was silent except for Clara's quiet sobbing. Ilias watched her, this young woman carrying so much guilt and grief and desperate hope, and he made his decision. We leave at dawn, he said, all three of us. We take the mining road through Copper Ridge. We move fast and we travel light. Clara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. You would do this. For me. Not just for you. Ilias moved to the window, looking out at the mountains that had been his prison and his sanctuary for so many years. Your father saved my life twice during the war, and he introduced me to the woman I loved, even if I did not deserve her. He turned back to face them. For too long, I have been hiding on this mountain, running from my own failures. Maybe it is time I stopped running. Maybe it is time I tried to do something right for a change. Webb nodded. Then we have a plan. But I should warn you, those men of Stanhope's are not going to just let us go. They will follow. Let them follow. Elias checked his rifle, ensuring it was loaded and ready. They will not catch us. And if they do, they will regret it. That night, as they made their final preparations, Clara found Elias sitting alone on the porch, despite the bitter cold. She sat down beside him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Can I ask you something? He nodded. What happened to the man who spread those rumors about your wife? Elias was quiet for a long moment. Samuel Vance, he said finally. That was his name. He wanted Marguerite for himself. When she chose me, he could not accept it. So he tried to destroy what we had. And did he succeed? For a while. Elias stared out at the snow-covered landscape, his face hard. I believed his lies. I let them poison my mind against the woman I loved. By the time I learned the truth, it was too late. What happened to him? I do not know. After Marguerite died, I left. Came here. Never looked back. Clara was silent for a moment. Then she said, I hope he is still alive. Ilias turned to look at her, surprised. Because that means he has had to live with what he did, Clara explained. He has had to wake up every day knowing the damage he caused. That is a worse punishment than death. Maybe. Ilias turned back to the darkness. But some nights I wish I had been the one to deliver justice instead of leaving it to God. They sat together in silence. Two people bound by guilt and grief and the desperate hope of redemption. And somewhere in the darkness, watching unseen, Stanhope's men noted the light in the cabin window and began to make their own plans. Morning would bring the beginning of the journey, but first there would be one last moment of peace. Clara found herself unable to sleep. She wandered back to the main room and discovered Elias still awake, sitting before the dying fire. May I join you? He nodded. She lowered herself carefully into the chair across from him. For a long while neither spoke. Then Clara asked, Do you think Daniel can forgive me for doubting him? He already has. How do you know? Because he spent 6 months in prison protecting you. Elias's voice was quiet but certain. A man does not make that sacrifice for someone he has not already forgiven. Clara was silent. Then, surprising herself, she began to recite softly, The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. She continued through the psalm, her voice growing stronger with each verse. And as she spoke, she noticed that Elias's lips moved silently along with her words. When she finished, the silence seemed different somehow, fuller, more peaceful. Elias looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. I have not said those words in so many years, but you remembered them. Some things you cannot forget, no matter how hard you try. Clara reached out and took his hand. Then maybe, she said gently, maybe that means God has not forgotten you either. Elias did not respond, but he did not pull his hand away. They sat together in the flickering firelight, two broken people finding their first fragile threads of healing. And when dawn finally came, they would face it together. But the road ahead would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world blanketed in pristine white, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Elias had been awake for hours, loading supplies into Webb's wagon. It was a sturdy vehicle, enclosed with canvas stretched over a wooden frame, with a small stove inside that would provide heat during the journey. Not comfortable, but survivable. Clara emerged from the cabin dressed in every warm thing she owned. Her face was pale but determined. Her hand rested on her belly in that now familiar gesture of protection. Are you ready? Elias asked. No, but I am going anyway. Fair enough. They settled Clara in the back of the wagon with blankets and heated stones to keep her warm. Webb would drive while Elias rode ahead as a scout, watching for both natural dangers and human ones. The mining road through Copper Ridge begins about 3 miles north, Webb said, consulting his map. After that, it is roughly 80 miles to Deer Lodge. If we make good time and do not run into trouble, we can be there in 3 days. 3 days. Clara's hand pressed against her belly. That is cutting it close. It is the best we can do. Elias mounted his horse, checking his rifle one last time. Let us move. The first day passed without incident. The mining road was exactly as dangerous as Elias remembered. Steep switchbacks carved into the mountainside. Narrow passages where the wagon's wheels rolled within inches of a 100-foot drop. Loose rocks hidden beneath the snow that could send a horse sliding off the edge. But they moved steadily forward, covering nearly 30 miles before darkness forced them to stop. They made camp in a shallow cave that offered protection from the wind. While Webb saw to the horses, Elias helped Clara down from the wagon and checked her condition. How are you feeling? Tired. Clara lowered herself onto a blanket near the fire Webb was building, but nothing more. The baby has been quiet today. That is normal. Travel will do that. Elias. Clara looked up at him with worried eyes. What if we do not make it in time? What if Daniel dies before I can tell him? Then we will have done everything we could. That is not good enough. I know. Elias sat down across from her. But it is all we have. All any of us ever has. They ate a simple meal of preserved meat and hardtack. Not appetizing, but nourishing. As they ate, Webb told them more about Daniel's final days in prison. He started a school, you know, teaching the other prisoners to read and write. Clara's eyes widened. He did. Some of the guards did not like it, thought it would cause trouble, but I convinced the warden to allow it. Webb's weathered face softened with memory. Your husband changed that place, Mrs. Whitmore. Made it a little more human, a little less like hell. That sounds like Daniel. Clara wiped her eyes. He always believed education was freedom. Even when we had nothing, he would spend what little money we had on books. He taught me to read, Webb admitted quietly. Every evening after lockdown, he would work with me through the cell bars, patient, never judging. The first book I read, cover to cover, was the Bible, because of your husband. Clara reached out and touched Webb's arm. Thank you, she said, for taking care of him, for coming to find me. It was the least I could do. Webb looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. After everything he did for me, I owed him that much and more. They fell into exhausted sleep, taking turns keeping watch through the night. But the darkness remained empty. No signs of pursuit, no sounds but the wind and the occasional hoot of an owl. The second day was harder. The temperature dropped dramatically as they climbed higher into the mountains. Ice formed on the wagon's wheels, making the already treacherous road even more dangerous. Twice they had to stop and chip away ice before they could continue. Clara began having contractions around midday. "They are just practice ones," she insisted when Elias expressed concern. "Braxton Hicks. My body preparing for the birth. How often? Every 30 minutes or so. They do not hurt much. Just pressure." Elias exchanged a worried look with Webb over Clara's head. They both knew what early labor in the middle of nowhere could mean. "We push on," Elias decided. "But if those contractions get closer together or stronger, we stop." "Understood." Clara nodded. "Just get me to Daniel. Whatever it takes." They made 20 miles that day, despite the ice and the cold, and the constant fear of Clara's condition changing. By nightfall, they were both exhausted and on edge. Camp that night was in a thick stand of pines that offered some protection from the wind. Webb gathered firewood while Elias helped Clara down from the wagon. And then he saw them. Riders. 4 of them, silhouetted against the fading sky on a ridge about a mile back. "Company," Elias said quietly. Webb stopped gathering wood. "Stanhope's men. Has to be. They have been following us since we left the cabin, staying just far enough back that we would not notice unless we were looking." "What do we do?" "We keep moving." Elias helped Clara settle near the fire they were building. "They cannot attack us during the day without being seen. And at night they do not know the terrain well enough to approach without making noise. What if they do attack? Then we fight. And we hope we are better than they are." Clara's face was pale but determined. "I can shoot," she said. "Daniel taught me." "No," Elias shook his head firmly. "You stay in the wagon no matter what happens. That baby is your only job now. Webb and I will handle the rest." The night passed tensely. Elias took first watch, then Webb, then Elias again. Several times he thought he heard movement in the darkness, but nothing materialized. By morning, the riders on the ridge had moved closer. Now they were only half a mile back, making no effort to hide their presence. "They are hurting us," Webb observed, "pushing us towards something, or waiting for us to make a mistake. Either way, we cannot stop now." Clara's voice came from inside the wagon. "We are too close. Daniel is too close." She was right. They were perhaps 40 miles from Deer Lodge now. One more day of hard travel would get them there. Unless the riders decided to stop waiting. The attack came at midday. They were navigating a particularly treacherous stretch of road, a narrow ledge carved into the mountainside with a sheer drop on one side and a rock wall on the other. The wagon could barely fit, and there was no room to maneuver. The first shot took Webb's horse in the leg. The animal screamed and went down, throwing Webb from the driver's seat. The wagon lurched, one wheel sliding toward the edge of the cliff, before Elias grabbed the reins of the lead horse and hauled back with all his strength. "Get under cover," he shouted to Webb as more shots rang out. The old guard was already moving, rolling behind a boulder at the base of the rock wall. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead, but he was alive and his rifle was in his hands. "Clara," Elias called. "Stay down, I am down." Her voice came from inside the wagon, steady despite the circumstances. "I am fine." The attackers were positioned above them, on a ledge perhaps 50 yards up the rock wall. A perfect ambush site. They had been waiting here, knowing the mining road would bring their quarry right into their trap. Elias counted muzzle flashes. 3 shooters, which meant one had either stayed back or was flanking them from another position. "Can you see them?" Webb called. 3 above us. 1 missing." "I will take the left side. You take right." Webb began firing, his shots measured and precise despite his injury. Elias added his own rifle to the barrage. The shooters above had good cover, but they could not hit their targets either without exposing themselves. Stalemate. Then Clara screamed. Elias whirled to see the 4th man, the missing shooter, crawling out from beneath the wagon. He must have approached from behind while they were focused on the ambush above, waiting until the gunfire covered his movement. The man had a pistol aimed at Clara's head. He was young, barely 25, with nervous eyes and trembling hands. "Drop your weapon, Calhoun, or she dies." Elias froze. The young man was clearly in over his head, but that made him more dangerous, not less. "Victor Stanhope sends his regards," the young man said, his voice cracking. "He wants the documents. Give them to me and maybe I let her live." She does not have them, Elias said, keeping his voice calm. They are hidden. Somewhere you will never find them. Then she dies for nothing. The young man's finger tightened on the trigger, and Clara, with a movement faster than should have been possible for a woman 8 months pregnant, grabbed the small pistol Webb had given her and fired through the canvas of the wagon. The bullet caught the young man in the shoulder. He spun, cursing, and his shot went wild, punching through the wagon's canvas roof. Ilias did not hesitate. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and slammed the butt of his rifle into the man's skull. The young man collapsed and did not move. Clara, Elias tore open the wagon's canvas. Are you hurt? She sat with the pistol still gripped in both hands, her chest heaving with rapid breaths. I am fine, she gasped. The baby is fine. I think I might be sick. That is normal. Elias allowed himself one moment of relief before turning back to the battle. But there was no more battle to fight. Webb had apparently used the distraction to advance on the shooter's position. 2 of them lay motionless on the ledge above. The third was running, disappearing over the ridge and out of sight. One got away, Webb called down, his voice strained. But he is not coming back. Not after this. Elias surveyed the damage. 1 dead horse, which meant the wagon was going nowhere. Clara was shaking but uninjured. Webb was bleeding but functional, and they still had 40 miles to go. We have a problem, he said. I know. Webb was already climbing down from the ledge. I saw a mine shaft about 2 miles back. We passed it this morning. We can shelter there while we figure out our next move. The mine shaft. Ilias felt something cold settle in his stomach, a memory of the vision that had haunted his dreams for weeks now. The baby, not breathing. What is it? Clara asked, seeing his expression. Nothing. Just planning. Elias forced his voice to remain steady. Can you walk? I think so. Then we move. Now. Before that runner gets back to Stanhope with reinforcements. They salvaged what supplies they could from the damaged wagon, loaded them onto the surviving horses, and began the slow trek back to the mine shaft. Clara made it less than a mile before her water broke. It is too early, she gasped, clutching Elias's arm as another contraction seized her. 3 weeks too early. Babies do not care about timing, Elias said, though his heart was pounding. How far apart are the contractions? 5 minutes, maybe less. Then we need to move faster. Webb took one of Clara's arms, Elias took the other, and together they half-carried her through the snow. The mine shaft loomed ahead, a dark mouth in the mountainside that promised shelter and danger in equal measure. They made it inside just as the next contraction hit. Clara cried out, bending double with the force of it, and Elias knew. This baby was coming now, whether they were ready or not. The mine shaft was exactly as bad as he had feared. Cold, damp, pitch black beyond the first few feet. But it was sheltered from the wind, and the walls would hide the light of a fire from anyone searching for them. Build a fire, Elias ordered Webb. Get it as big as you can without smoking us out. Then boil water, as much water as you can find. What about you? I am delivering this baby. Clara grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Elias, I am scared. He looked into her pale eyes, so like her father's, so full of fear and hope and desperate courage. I know, he said. I am scared too. But we are going to do this together, and we are going to get through it, both of you. The labor lasted 8 hours. 8 hours of Clara crying out in pain, of Elias working by firelight to guide the baby into the world, of Webb praying in the corner with his hands pressed together like a man who has forgotten how to pray, but remembers it when he needs it most. 8 hours of Elias fighting his own demons, seeing Marguerite's face in the shadows, hearing his son's silence echoing through the years, feeling the weight of every failure, every guilt, every moment of cowardice that had brought him to this place. And then finally the baby came. A girl, perfect and small and silent. The nightmare had become reality. Elias held the infant in his trembling hands and watched her tiny lips turn blue. Clara lay on the makeshift bed of blankets, reaching for her child with desperate hands. My baby, why is she not crying? Elias, why is she not crying? No, Elias whispered. Not this time. Not again. He turned the baby face down, struck her back, once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Breathe, he commanded. Damn you, breathe. The fourth strike was everything he had left. Every ounce of desperation and grief and furious hope channeled into a single blow. And then, the cough, the sputter, the cry, the most beautiful sound in the world. She is breathing, Elias said, his voice breaking. Clara, your daughter is breathing. He wrapped the baby in the cleanest cloth they had and placed her on Clara's chest. Mother and child both crying, both alive, both miracles. Hope, Clara whispered, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead. Daniel wanted to name her Hope. Elias sat back against the cold rock wall. The tears came then, years of unshed grief pouring out in the darkness of an abandoned mine. Behind him, Webb removed his hat and bowed his head. Even the old guard, hardened by years of witnessing human cruelty, wiped his eyes. For one brief moment, there was peace. Then the sound of hoofbeats echoed from outside, and Elias knew. Stanhope had found them. The hoofbeats stopped just outside the mine entrance. Voices, low and urgent, carried through the darkness. She is in there. I saw the smoke. How many with her? 2 men. The old prison guard and someone else. Maybe a local. Any sign of the documents? Not yet. But she has them. She has to have them. Elias pressed himself against the rock wall, peering out through a gap in the mine's entrance. He counted 3 figures silhouetted against the moonlit snow. One of them, taller than the others with the bearing of a military officer despite his civilian clothes, stepped forward. Victor Stanhope. Even in the darkness, Elias could see the predatory gleam in the man's eyes. The look of someone who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. Mrs. Whitmore. Stanhope's voice echoed into the mine. I know you are in there, and I know you have my property. Come out now, bring the documents, and I will make this quick. Refuse, and things will become unpleasant. Clara looked up from where she lay with hope pressed against her breast. Her face was pale, exhausted, but her eyes burned with defiance. He killed my father, she whispered to Elias. He put my husband in prison. He is not getting those documents. Then we fight, Elias said quietly. Webb. How is your shoulder? The old guard flexed his wounded arm, wincing. Functional. I can shoot. Good. Elias checked his rifle. There are 3 of them that I can see. We have better cover and the advantage of darkness. If we can hold them off until dawn, they will have to retreat or risk being seen. And if they do not retreat, then we make them pay for every inch they advance. Mrs. Whitmore. Stanhope's voice came again, edged with impatience. I am not a patient man. You have 1 minute to respond. Clara looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around them. Then she looked at Elias. What would Daniel want me to do? He would want you to survive, Elias said. Both of you, whatever it takes. Then tell that monster to go to hell. Webb permitted himself a grim smile, with pleasure. He moved to the mine entrance, staying in the shadows where he could not be targeted. Captain Stanhope, he called out. This is Sergeant Marcus Webb, Deer Lodge Territorial Prison. You are attempting to harm a woman under the protection of the territorial government. I am ordering you to stand down. Stanhope laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that echoed off the mountainside. Webb, I should have known you would be involved in this. You always were too soft on the prisoners. Lieutenant Whitmore was innocent. You know it, I know it, and soon the whole territory will know it. No, Stanhope's voice hardened. They will not, because you are all going to die in this mine, and the documents are going to burn with you. He raised his hand and made a gesture to his men. The first shot rang out. It struck the rock wall inches from Webb's head, sending stone chips flying. Webb returned fire, his aim steady despite his injury. One of Stanhope's men, the brute called Harlan, cursed and dropped behind cover. The firefight that followed was brutal and brief. In the darkness, neither side could see well enough to aim properly. Bullets ricocheted off stone walls, creating sparks that briefly illuminated the chaos. Then Webb stepped forward to get a better angle, and Stanhope's bullet caught him in the shoulder. The old guard went down hard, blood blooming across his uniform. Elias dragged him back into the shelter of the mine, while bullets whined overhead. How bad? Webb's face was gray with pain. I will live. Just keep them out. Elias turned back to the entrance. He could see Stanhope and his men advancing now, moving from cover to cover, working their way toward the mine. Think, Calhoun. Think. He looked around the mine shaft, searching for any advantage. The walls were solid rock, impossible to dig through. The entrance was the only way in or out. They were trapped, unless... His eyes fell on a pile of old timbers near the back of the shaft, mining supports left behind when the shaft was abandoned. Dry as bone, extremely flammable. Webb. Can you still shoot? The old guard nodded, gritting his teeth against the pain. Then cover me. I have an idea. Elias grabbed an armful of the dry timbers and dragged them toward the entrance. He arranged them just inside the opening, where any attacker would have to pass. Then he soaked them with the cooking oil they had brought for the journey. When they come, Elias said, we light this. The fire will block the entrance long enough for us to think of something else. And if we cannot think of something else, then we take as many of them with us as we can. Clara had been listening, her face pale but resolved. There is another way, she said. Elias turned. The documents. She reached into the bundle of supplies and pulled out a leather satchel. These are copies. The originals are with the U.S. Marshal in Helena. What? I sent them 3 weeks ago, before I even reached your cabin. The moment I realized what Daniel had given me, I made copies and mailed the originals to Helena, where Stanhope could never reach them. Clara's voice was steady now, filled with a strength born of desperation. These papers in my hands are worthless to him. He just does not know it yet. Elias stared at her. That is brilliant. That is Daniel's idea. He told me in his last letter before the trial, make copies. Send the originals somewhere safe. Never put all your eggs in one basket. A plan began to form in Elias's mind. Dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it might just work. Can you walk? Clara's face flickered with uncertainty. I just gave birth 6 hours ago. I know, but can you walk? She looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Then she looked up at Elias with those winter sky eyes that held more courage than anyone he had ever known. I can try. Then here is what we are going to do. The plan was simple in concept, nearly impossible in execution. Elias would create a distraction at the front of the mine, make it look like they were trying to break out. While Stanhope and his men focused on him, Webb would lead Clara and Hope out through a narrow crack in the back of the shaft that Elias had spotted earlier. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, invisible in the darkness, and it opened onto a steep slope behind the mine. If they could reach the tree line before Stanhope realized what was happening, they might have a chance. You will die, Webb said flatly. They will cut you down the moment you show yourself. Maybe. Elias loaded his rifle for what might be the last time. But Clara and the baby will live. That is what matters. Clara grabbed his arm. Elias. No. There has to be another way. There is not. He met her eyes and something passed between them. An understanding. A connection forged in fire and fear and desperate hope. Your father saved my life twice. Let me repay that debt now. But take care of Hope. Tell her about her father. Make sure she grows up knowing he was a hero. Tears streamed down Clara's face. Elias, go. Now. Before I change my mind. Webb half-carried Clara toward the crack in the back of the shaft. She turned back once, her face a portrait of grief and gratitude, and then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Elias turned toward the mine entrance. He could hear Stanhope's men approaching now, their boots crunching on snow. This was it. The end of too many years of hiding, the end of running. He lit the pile of timbers with a match from his kit. Flames leapt up, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Smoke began to fill the air. Then he stepped out into the open, rifle raised, ready to die. What happened next would become legend in Willow Creek, told and retold for generations. As Elias emerged from the mine, silhouetted against the flames, Stanhope and his men opened fire. But the smoke and the fire created chaos, and their shots went wide. Elias fired back, his aim true despite the confusion. Harlan went down, clutching his leg. Then more shots rang out, but not from Stanhope's direction, from the ridge above. Elias looked up and saw them. 4 riders descending the slope, their rifles blazing. At their head rode a man in black, his white collar visible even in the darkness. Father Thomas Brennan, parish priest of Willow Creek. Behind him came Owen Garrett, U.S. Marshal for Montana Territory. And behind him, 3 armed deputies. Stanhope's remaining gunman threw down his weapon and raised his hands. But Stanhope himself, seeing his trap closing around him, made a desperate move. He ran for the mine. Elias saw him coming too late to stop him. Stanhope barreled past, knocking Elias aside, and disappeared into the flames and smoke, going for Clara. Elias scrambled to his feet and followed. Inside the mine, the fire had spread farther than he expected. Flames licked at the wooden supports, and smoke made it impossible to see more than a few feet. But Elias knew these passages now, had memorized them during the long hours of Clara's labor. He found Stanhope at the back of the shaft, staring at the crack in the rock where Clara had escaped. "She is gone," Elias said, raising his rifle. "Whatever you came for, you failed." Stanhope turned. His face was twisted with rage and fear. "Those documents will destroy me. They already have. The originals are with the U.S. Marshal. They have been for weeks. Whatever you do to me, to any of us, it will not change that." Stanhope's hand moved toward his pistol. Elias was faster. The shot echoed through the mine like thunder. Stanhope staggered back, clutching his arm where the bullet had torn through flesh and bone. "Drop the weapon," Elias commanded. "It is over." For a long moment, Stanhope stared at him with pure hatred in his eyes. Then his shoulders slumped. His pistol clattered to the ground. "You do not understand," Stanhope whispered. "I had no choice. The gambling debts, the threats. I did what I had to do to survive." "We always have a choice," Elias replied. "You made yours. Now live with it." The marshal's deputies appeared behind Elias, their weapons trained on Stanhope. Within minutes, the former captain was in chains, being led out of the mine. Clara emerged from the tree line as dawn broke over the mountains. Hope was crying in her arms, hungry and cold and very much alive. She saw Elias standing in front of the mine, covered in soot and blood but breathing, and she ran to him. "You are alive," she gasped. "Oh God, you are alive. Takes more than a corrupt captain to kill me." Elias looked down at Hope, wailing against her mother's chest. "Looks like your daughter is not happy about missing the excitement." Clara laughed through her tears. She has her father's temperament. Never wants to miss a fight. Father Brennan approached them, his face grave but relieved. "Mrs. Whitmore, I have news." Clara's expression shifted. "Daniel." "I am sorry." The priest's voice was gentle. "He passed 2 days ago, before we could reach Deer Lodge." Clara closed her eyes. For a moment she stood perfectly still, absorbing the blow. Then she opened her eyes and they were dry. "Did he know," she asked quietly, "that I was coming?" Brennan nodded. "I reached him before the end. Told him you were on your way, that you believed him, that you loved him, that he was going to be a father." "What did he say?" "He smiled, Mrs. Whitmore." The priest's own eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He smiled and said, 'Hope,' and then he was gone." Clara looked down at her daughter, sleeping now despite the cold. "Hope," she whispered. His last word was her name. "He left something for you." Brennan reached into his coat and pulled out a worn envelope. A letter. He wrote it the night before he died. Clara took the envelope with trembling hands. But she did not open it. Not yet. Some things required privacy. Some things required time. "There is one more thing." The voice was Stanhope's, ragged with pain and rage as the deputies held him. "One more truth you should hear." Everyone turned. Stanhope's face was twisted with bitter satisfaction. "Your father, Robert Holbrook. He was not the saint you think he was." "What are you talking about? 15 years ago, before you were born, your father was drowning in debt. Your mother was dying. He needed money." Stanhope laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "So he took some of mine. A small cut, a tiny percentage, just enough to save his precious wife." Clara's face went pale. "You are lying, am I? Ask yourself why I chose Daniel to take the fall. Why I knew the Holbrook family would never fight too hard against the conviction. Because your father was already in my pocket, had been for years, but he tried to expose you. Yes. After a decade of guilt, he finally grew a conscience. Tried to make amends, and I killed him for it. Stanhope's eyes gleamed with malice. Your father was not a hero, Mrs. Whitmore. He was a coward who made one right choice too late to matter. The silence stretched. Then Clara spoke, her voice steady despite everything. My father made a terrible mistake. He compromised his honor to save my mother, but he spent the rest of his life trying to make it right. He died trying to do the right thing. She looked Stanhope in the eye. That is the difference between you. He could not live with his guilt. You embraced yours. He tried to change. You just kept taking. She turned away. Take him. The deputies led Stanhope away, and Clara did not watch him go. 4 months later, the spring thaw came early to the Bitterroot Mountains. Clara stood on the ridge above Elias's cabin, watching the snow melt from the peaks. Hope slept in the sling across her chest, her tiny face peaceful. Behind her, 3 graves stood in a neat row. Simple wooden markers, freshly carved. Marguerite Calhoun, Thomas Calhoun, Daniel Whitmore. The bodies had been brought here over the long winter. Marguerite and the baby from their original graves in Iowa, Daniel from Deer Lodge. It had taken every cent of the restitution money the Army had paid Clara, but she had insisted. They should be together, she had said. The people we loved, the people we failed, they should rest in the same place. Elias climbed the ridge to join her. In his hand, he carried a bundle of wildflowers, the first of the season. How are you feeling? He asked. Strange, Clara admitted. 4 months ago, I was running for my life. Now I am standing in a place that feels more like home than anywhere I have ever lived. Is that a bad thing? No. She looked at him with those winter sky eyes that had seen so much grief and found so much strength. It is unexpected, but not bad. They placed flowers on all 3 graves. Elias knelt before Marguerite's marker longest, his hand resting on the rough wood. I am sorry, he said quietly, for not believing you, for not being there, for all the years I wasted in guilt instead of living. Clara came to stand beside him. She does not blame you. Wherever she is now, she understands. How do you know? Because Daniel forgave me. In his letter, he wrote that he never doubted me, even when I doubted him. That love does not keep score. It just keeps loving. Elias stood slowly. His eyes moved from Marguerite's grave to Clara's face. You read his letter. That night, after Father Brennan gave it to me. She smiled, a sad but peaceful smile. He told me to name our daughter Hope, to raise her knowing her father loved her. And he told me to forgive myself, to live, to be happy. And are you? Clara looked down at Hope, stirring in her sling. I am getting there. They walked back down the ridge together, their shoulders almost touching. The cabin below was transformed from the cold, lonely place Elias had inhabited for so many years. Curtains hung in the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney. The smell of bread baking and coffee brewing drifted up the mountainside. Webb had stayed through the winter, helping with repairs and recovering from his wound. He was inside now, probably reading one of the books Daniel had taught him to love. Father Brennan came by every few weeks to check on them, to perform small services, to remind them that faith did not require perfection, only persistence. The money from the Army, nearly $3,000 in back pay and restitution, sat in a bank in Helena. Enough for Clara to start over anywhere she wanted. She had chosen to stay. Elias, Clara said as they approached the cabin, I have been thinking about something. What? This arrangement of ours. It was supposed to be temporary. I stay until the baby comes, then we revisit. Elias stopped walking. His heart, which he thought had died with Marguerite, began to beat faster. Are you saying you want to leave? No. Clara turned to face him. I am saying I want to stay. Really stay. Not as a tenant or a housekeeper or whatever we have been calling it. Then as what? Clara met his eyes. She was not the desperate pregnant woman who had held him at gunpoint 4 months ago. She was stronger now, steadier, forged by fire into something unbreakable. As a partner, she said, as someone who chooses to be here, not because she has nowhere else to go, but because this is where she wants to be. Elias was quiet for a long moment. I am not Daniel, he said finally. I cannot replace him. I am not asking you to. What I had with Daniel was real, and I will love him until I die. But he wanted me to live. to find happiness, to give hope a family. She reached out and took his hand. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You delivered my daughter in a mine shaft in the middle of a blizzard. You nearly died protecting us. That means something. It means I did what any decent person would do. No, it means you chose to help when you could have turned away. It means you decided I was worth saving when you had spent so many years convincing yourself you could not save anyone. She squeezed his hand. I am not proposing romantic love, Elias. Maybe that will come with time. Maybe it will not. But I am proposing partnership. Two people who have both lost everything, choosing to build something new together, for hope's sake and for ours. Elias looked at her hand in his, small but strong, calloused from work, trembling slightly with the courage it took to say these words. He thought about Marguerite, about the guilt he had carried for so long, about the forgiveness he had finally found in the darkness of that mine, with a baby who was not breathing and a prayer he had not said in so many years. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it properly. Marriage, legal and binding. So hope has a father in name as well as practice. So you have security. Clara's eyes widened. Are you proposing? I suppose I am. Badly. Alice felt the ghost of a smile touch his face. It has been a while since I did this. Clara laughed. It was a beautiful sound, full of joy and relief and something that might, with time, become love. Then I suppose I am accepting, equally badly. The wedding took place in the small church in Willow Creek, with Father Brennan presiding. Half the town attended, curious about the mysterious woman who had arrived pregnant and alone and was now marrying the hermit from the mountain. Clara wore a simple dress the church ladies had sewn. Elias wore his best clothes, stiff with disuse. Hope, now 4 months old, slept through most of the ceremony and woke only to voice her objection during the final blessing. Everyone laughed. It felt exactly right. What God has joined, Brennan intoned with a satisfied smile. Let no man tear asunder. Elias, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle, tender, a promise of things to come, rather than a declaration of passion. When they parted, Hope was watching them with dark, serious eyes that seemed to understand more than any baby should. Welcome to the family, Elias whispered to her. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains and the wedding guests returned to their homes, Elias and Clara sat on the porch of their cabin. Their cabin now, shared and warm and alive with the sounds of a family. Do you think Daniel can see this? Clara asked quietly. Wherever he is. I think, Elias said slowly, that wherever Daniel is, he is at peace, knowing you are safe, knowing Hope is loved, knowing his sacrifice was not in vain. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. And Marguerite. Elias thought about his first wife, about the diary he had found, about the forgiveness he had finally accepted. I think she would want me to be happy, he said. And for the first time in so many years, I think I might actually manage it. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one. The mountains stood guard around them, eternal and unchanging. The wind carried the scent of pine and snow and the promise of spring. In her cradle by the fire, Hope Marguerite Whitmore slept peacefully, dreaming baby dreams of a future she could not yet imagine. A future built on sacrifice and love, and the courage to keep going even when all seemed lost. A future made possible by two people who had learned the hardest lesson of all. That redemption is not about erasing the past. It is about choosing to live despite it, choosing to love despite the fear of loss, choosing to hope even when hope seems foolish. And in the end, that choice is all any of us have. That choice is what makes us human. The night deepened. The fire burned low. And in the cabin in the Bitterroot Mountains, a new chapter began. One morning, several weeks after the wedding, Clara found Elias standing before the 3 graves on the ridge. He had been there since dawn, she realized. Not moving, just standing. She climbed the hill to join him, hope strapped to her chest as always. You are up early, she said. Could not sleep. Elias did not turn around. I was thinking about something Daniel wrote in that letter. What did he say? He said that the past is not a prison unless we make it one. that we can honor the people we have lost without letting their ghosts control our future. Clara came to stand beside him. That sounds like Daniel. He also said that forgiveness is not something we earn. It is something we accept, and that the hardest person to forgive is always ourselves. Ilias finally turned to look at her. In his eyes, she saw something she had not seen before. Not peace exactly, but the beginning of it. The first fragile shoots of healing breaking through frozen ground. I spent too many years punishing myself for Marguerite's death, he said quietly. I thought my guilt was a tribute to her memory, but it was not. It was just selfishness, a way of making her death about me instead of about her. And now I think she would want me to let it go, to live, to be present for you and hope instead of lost in the past. Clara reached out and took his hand. That is what she would want, what Daniel would want too. Elias nodded slowly. Then let us make a promise, both of us, here in front of them. What kind of promise? That we will not waste another day on guilt, that we will live fully, love openly, and be grateful for every moment we have, that we will raise hope to know she was born from tragedy and triumph, and that both made her stronger. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I promise. I promise too. Ilias looked at the three graves one last time. Rest now, he said to them. All of you. We will take it from here. They walked down the ridge together, hand in hand. Behind them, the morning sun broke over the mountains, bathing the graves in golden light. The past remained. It would always remain, but it no longer held them captive. They were free. Months passed. Summer came to the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the valleys in wildflowers and the ridges in deep green. Elias discovered he still remembered how to laugh. Clara discovered she could think about Daniel without crying. And hope grew. She crawled, then walked, then ran with the fearless energy of a child who has never known danger. She called Elias Papa, though they had never taught her the word. She called Clara Mama, and sometimes when the light fell a certain way and her dark eyes caught the sun, she looked so much like Daniel that Clara's breath would catch in her throat. One autumn evening, as the leaves turned gold and red, and the first hints of winter touched the air, Clara found a letter in the box where Daniel's documents had been stored. A letter she had somehow missed before. It was addressed to Hope. My darling daughter, Daniel had written, I will never hold you, never see your face, never hear you call me father, but know that I loved you before you were born, and I will love you beyond death. Your mother is the bravest woman I have ever known. Whatever she tells you about me, believe her. She has never lied to you. And if by the time you read this another man has taken my place in your life, do not resent him. Thank him. He is there because I could not be. He is giving you what I would have given if I could. Be strong, little one. Be kind. Be brave. And always, always remember that you were loved from your first breath to my last. Your father, Daniel. Clara read the letter aloud that night, sitting by the fire with Elias and Hope. Hope was too young to understand the words, but she seemed to sense their importance. She sat still on Clara's lap, her dark eyes fixed on her mother's face. When Clara finished reading, she looked at Elias. He came for me, she said. In the end, even from prison, even dying, he found a way to protect us both. He was a good man, Elias agreed. One of the best I never met. Clara smiled through her tears. You would have liked him. I already do. They sat together in the firelight, a family bound not by blood but by choice, by sacrifice, by love. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, but inside, the fire burned warm and bright, and no one was afraid of the cold. The story of Victor Stanhope ended in a federal courtroom in Helena. He was convicted of embezzlement, conspiracy, and 2 counts of murder. The judge sentenced him to hang. Clara did not attend the execution, but Webb did. He returned to the cabin afterward with a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. It is done, he said. He will never hurt anyone again. Clara nodded. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not closure, not grief. Stanhope had been a shadow over her life for too long. Now that shadow was gone, and she discovered she did not need revenge. She only needed to live. Webb stayed for dinner that night, then rode back to Deer Lodge where he had accepted a position as deputy warden. He was changing things, he said, making the prison more humane, continuing the work Daniel had started. Before he left, he shook Elias's hand. "Take care of them," he said. "I intend to." Webb turned to Clara. "Your husband changed my life. The least I can do is try to change others the way he changed me." "Then you will honor him," Clara said, "more than any monument ever could." The years that followed were good years. Not perfect, but good. Elias and Clara built a life together. They raised hope. They weathered storms both literal and figurative. They learned to trust each other, then to depend on each other, and finally, slowly, to love each other. It was not the passionate love of youth. It was something different, deeper, quieter. The love of two people who had seen the worst of life and chosen to embrace the best of each other anyway. And Hope grew into a remarkable young woman, strong and kind and brave, just as Daniel had wished. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's fierce determination. She learned to ride and shoot and read and pray. She grew up knowing she was loved by three people: the mother who raised her, the father who saved her with his sacrifice, and the man who chose to be her papa when he did not have to. On her 18th birthday, Clara gave her Daniel's letter. Hope read it alone, sitting on the ridge where three graves stood guard over the valley. When she came back down, her eyes were red, but her smile was peaceful. "He loved me," she said. "I always knew it, but now I have proof." "You were his last thought," Clara said. "His last word, his last hope." Hope hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for telling me his story, for making sure I knew who he was. He deserves to be remembered. And so does your papa." Hope looked at Elias, standing quietly by the cabin door. "He saved my life," she said. "The night I was born. Mama told me." "He did," Clara confirmed. Hope walked to Elias and threw her arms around him. The man who had delivered her in a mine shaft in the middle of a blizzard, who had nearly died protecting her mother, who had spent 18 years teaching her everything he knew, hugged her back. "Thank you," Hope said, "for choosing us." Elias's voice was rough with emotion. "Best choice I ever made." Clara watched them, her husband and her daughter, and felt her heart overflow with a joy she had not thought possible 18 years ago. Daniel's sacrifice had made this possible. His love, his courage, his willingness to suffer so that others might be free. He had given them hope, and they had honored his gift by living it. The years continued to pass. Elias's hair turned fully gray, then white. Clara's face lined with laugh lines and the marks of a life well lived. Hope married a good man from Willow Creek, a school teacher named James who had never seen a war but had read about them in books. They had two children, a boy and a girl. The boy was named Daniel. The girl was named Marguerite. On the ridge above the cabin, 4 graves now stood in a row. Elias had added his own marker years ago, leaving space beside Marguerite for when his time came. Clara's space waited beside Daniel's. "Not yet," Elias told her every time she mentioned it. "Not for a long while yet." One spring morning, when the wildflowers bloomed thick on the mountainside and the snow had finally melted from the highest peaks, Elias and Clara climbed the ridge one last time together. They were old now, moving slowly, but their hands remained clasped as they had been for over 20 years. "Do you remember," Clara asked, "the first time we stood here together?" "I remember. You had just given birth in a mine shaft. I had just shot a man, and we were both too exhausted to think straight." Clara laughed. "And yet here we are. Here we are." They stood before the graves in silence. The wind moved through the pines carrying the scent of spring and the whisper of memories. "We did it," Clara said quietly. "We honored them. We lived the life they wanted for us." "Yes." Elias squeezed her hand. "We did." Clara looked at him, her pale eyes still bright despite her years. "Do you have any regrets?" Elias thought about the question, about all the choices he had made, the ones that had led to pain and the ones that had led to healing. "Only one," he said finally. "I wish I had found you sooner. I wish I had not wasted so many years alone on this mountain, drowning in guilt." "You were not ready, I was not ready," Clara smiled. "We found each other when we were supposed to. Not a moment sooner, not a moment later." "You believe that. I do. Everything that happened, every tragedy, every triumph, brought us to this place, to this moment, to each other. Elias looked out over the valley that had been his home for so long, the cabin where he had lived alone for so many years, and together with Clara for 20 more, the mountains that had sheltered them from storms, the graves that held the people they had loved and lost. Then I have no regrets, he said, none at all. They stood together on the ridge as the sun climbed higher. Below them, in the cabin, Hope's children were waking up, their laughter carrying on the wind. The sound of hope, the sound of the future, the sound of everything Daniel had sacrificed for, finally realized. We should go down, Clara said. The children will want breakfast. In a moment. Elias turned to face her. There is something I want to say first. What is it? He took both her hands in his, the way he had on their wedding day so many years ago. Thank you, he said, for finding me, for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself, for giving me a reason to live again. Clara's eyes glistened with tears. Thank you for answering the door. When I showed up with a rifle and a belly full of baby and more baggage than any man should have to carry. Elias smiled. Best decision I ever made. They kissed, soft and tender, with the ease of two people who have loved each other through decades of joy and sorrow. Then they walked down the ridge together, hand in hand, toward the sounds of their family. Behind them, the graves stood silent witness. Daniel Whitmore, Marguerite Calhoun, Thomas Calhoun, and one empty space waiting for the day, still far off, when Elias Calhoun would finally rest. The wind moved through the wildflowers. The sun warmed the stone markers. And somewhere beyond the veil of death, perhaps, three souls smiled. Their loved ones were happy. Their sacrifices had not been in vain. And hope, after all, had won. The end.